Ways to measure fitness. I'm health and fitness expert Andrea Schneider. I'm here with my good friends Kiran and Dr. Harris. Please introduce yourself, Kiran.
Hey, I'm Kiran Langston, holistic nutritionist and healthy gut advisor to health professionals and health advocates.
And Dr. Harris, how are you?
Hello, I'm Dr. Harris. I'm a practicing veterinarian and author of The Good Life for Dogs.
So, Kiran, what's a way that you would say that is a good monitor to measure fitness?
Explain a little bit more, Andrea. What are you looking for?
Well, so, we all think about like weight and things like that. We get on a scale, oh, I lost 5 pounds, I gained 5 pounds. There's other ways to measure if you're fit or healthy. So I'll give an example. Like for me, I'm pretty active. I run, things like that. And so people who don't run, I think a measure could be, can you walk a mile in 15 minutes or less? And if you can't, that would be a goal that you get to a 15-minute walking pace for a mile, that would show an improvement in fitness. So that I'm talking about things that are actually concrete and measurable to see if we're making some progress and if we're at where we want to be.
Well, I think one of the things that you can look at is energy levels, and I think you touched a little bit on that. If you find it really tough to get through your day without some form of a caffeine product, I think that you have to take a look at how much movement you have through the day. I don't really like the word fitness or exercise. I think that they have become bad words. They're almost like the F word, And so I like the word movement. So some people, like I know you're an avid runner, Andrea, but I'm not an avid runner, and it's the last thing I'm ever going to do. In fact, I don't even think I could run for my own life, honestly.
Yeah.
So, I think for me it would be about those energy levels as well as how the mind is thinking as well. I mean, if you are suddenly, staying at home and avoiding being with other people, and your energy levels are just really low, that you seem to need that caffeine throughout the day, then maybe we need to look at, how much movement are we getting throughout the day, because we know with studies that this can make us actually feel better.
Yeah, I totally agree. Movement is important in so many ways. Dr. Harris is even more of an avid runner than I am. So, Dr. Harris, what's one of the ways you measure fitness?
Well, I'll tell you, I particularly am interested in having numbers. I'm a numbers guy, perhaps obsessively, my wife says. But what I find fascinating right now is there's so many ways to measure what our body is doing. And these are going to become much more commonly used and even take place perhaps of some of our doctor visits. So things like, an example is recently I got one of these Fitbit things like that. And it measures how many steps you took during the day and your heart rate and that sort of thing. I think for some people it's a motivation to say Fitbit has established 10,000 steps as they're like, this is what you should be doing in a day. I think that's probably too low, but the idea is that I do know about 3 or 4 people who have those who realized they were only getting 3,000 steps a day, and they started walking at their lunch breaks and things like that, and so it served as a motivator. So I think that having numbers to motivate us for some people is a good thing, particularly when we say a goal. To say we have a goal of having more energy is one thing, but to say we have a goal of weighing something. We know that people who lose more weight or control their weight better if they weigh themselves daily. Just having that number statistically makes people more likely to lose weight. And there's so many things there. So I would ask you, Andrea, if you had 3 things that you could measure, three numbers that you wanted to track to see how healthy you were, what would they be?
So for me, it would be how long I can hold a plank. And if you don't know what a plank is, then go down below, scroll down, and go onto my website, www.mybestme.us. And I can hold a plank, well, yesterday I held it for only 2 minutes or something like that, but I can hold it. My record is 8 minutes. But I would say for a person who's trying to get fit, they should get to over the 2-minute marker. So that's one of my things. And then let's go around, and then you can come back to me again. But I agree with you, Dr. Harris, about the Fitbit. I haven't been wearing mine lately, but when that little thing goes off and kind of vibrates that you've hit your 10,000 steps, it's kind of like, oh, wow, I hit it, And I personally stopped. I wasn't paying that much attention in tracking things, but I think for a lot of people that could be really good, especially if they're just getting going with the moving and the exercise, that could be really nice to have some kind of, and there's actually Fitbit groups and things like that, and you could join challenges and see how you're competing against other people. So I think that's very helpful and healthy if that works for you. So Kiran, what about you? What's another factor?
I'm going to feel like the total devil's advocate here, but I'm listening to this conversation, and I don't know. I just think of it concerns me that we are at a point in our lives where we have to wear a piece of gear on our wrist to motivate us to move. I mean, what happened before technology, And it's really sad where we've moved to that, and no disrespect whatsoever, but now that we need numbers to hit our goals, and it's almost like we're turning into this class A type personality where, we're not doing good enough unless we have these numbers. I mean, what happened to just, oh, you know what, I'm just going to go out and just go for a run. Who cares how far I go as long as I run and I feel good, and I just think back to even 20 years ago. What did we do? We didn't have things to motivate us to get out of the house. We just did. And so I just think that we have to look at what's happened with society that we're not doing that. And then Dr. Harris, we were talking before we went on air, talking about the farmer's diet. Well, and going back to the farmer, I mean, you didn't have a farmer wearing one of those and saying, okay, I got to make sure that I do at least 600 acres and get the corn all in, So I think it's amazing that we're having this conversation today and that we have to use numbers in order to motivate ourselves to get moving.
So, and why do you think that is, Dr. Harris? Why do you think people need that these days?
Well, I think there are some people that motivates them, some people that doesn't. But when you look at the gap of how many people aren't doing anything that helps would be fine.
Right.
The other point I would have is that we aren't aware of all the things. Being a doctor, I look at numbers all the time. What are your kidney values? What are your what's your heart rate? That kind of a thing on my patients, and it often tells me things that the animal wouldn't be aware of and the owner isn't aware of. A good example, though, when I talk about it would be nice to have more numbers. Now that we have things that do measure a lot of things that we aren't aware of, the best measurement of stress that we have is something called heart rate variability. And you can now get even a cell phone app that will record your heart rate variability. The idea being, the more stress you're under, even if you don't feel like you're stressed, the more stress you're under, the less variability there is in your heart rate. So your heart rate has minor irregularities. Those disappear when you're stressed. You don't know that. People who say, no, I'm not stressed, but you can measure that, and then you can find things to do. If it's meditate, and literally it's a biofeedback type of a thing, you can meditate or walk or do other things, and as long as you see your heart rate coming down, it gives you a way to manage it. And my point is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That's one of the oldest principles in the book.
Well, and I agree with Dr. Harris, and I'm a numbers girl too. Well, I think you're a numbers guy. But I like to measure things and see things, and I think numbers do speak a lot and give a lot of information, and so we can use it as a tool. I mean, obviously you want to go out and just enjoy life, and if you like there's days I just run just to run, like you mentioned, Kiran, and I don't want to keep track of my time or my distance. It's just I'm doing it and I'm enjoying nature. But there's other times I'm paying attention, like, gosh, like lately I've been slowing down because I had a foot issue and I had to let it heal. And I had to ease up for a while. So you have to listen to your own body, but sometimes you also want to make improvement on what you're doing. And so if we can use these technological tools, since they're out there, to help us get healthier or to make decisions, our doctors can help us make decisions or look and see, well, gosh, like Dr. Harris just mentioned, you're looking at stress based on your heart level, and you can monitor that so easily through an app or other ways. And doctors, I think, more and more are going to be relying on these apps. I read something about that recently, that they're going to be using a lot of this information, that we're going to be sending it to them, or they're going to have access to our information, good and bad. But, that's nice to know. So what else? What else, Kiran?
I don't know if you really want to ask me. I don't know. I go back, and we're all about numbers. And so some of the things that I want to know is who's coming up with the research for these numbers? What is their monetary gain in getting these numbers out? Because we've seen through medical history, we need to do this in order to make sure that we have good cardiovascular health. But then a pharmaceutical company comes along and says, you know what, we need to change these numbers, because if we change these numbers, then we can get more people on medication. So I look at the, especially when it comes to a lot of these test markers, who's coming up with these ideas of what's healthy and what's not healthy, and then I just think about, as a numbers person, looking at, okay, I need to do so many steps a day, and then and I got to make sure that I run this amount of miles in order to be healthy. I want to make sure I have these numbers and make sure that these heart arrhythmias aren't happening, and now you've got this app on your phone. I think that's going to cause more stress than just going out there and really connecting with nature. And I just really think that we need to take the cell phone. Don't take the cell phone with you. Take the watch off your arm and just go outside and hug a tree and just start walking. But I guess that's why I'm the holistic nutritionist, and you're the lawyer sometimes, and you're the doctor. So you guys are totally number oriented.
Right. And you know what? It's a matter of what works for the person. The idea is to get out and move. So if you don't need those apps and whatever, sure. Sometimes I go out with out those type of things. Lately, I've been wearing my Fitbit, but I still wear a watch when I'm running to see how my miles are going. But whatever it takes for you to get out and move more today than you did yesterday, and keep active, and have an active lifestyle, then that's the important thing. So I want to make one point about what you just said, Kiran. I think a good example of that is the statin drugs. I know over the years, the cholesterol is a perfect example. They lowered the threshold up. If you reach this amount of cholesterol, then you need to be taking a statin drug. Mm-hmm. So we won't get into that whole discussion, but I think that's on target with what you're saying. And Dr. Hira, so what's your take on what we're just discussing and other measurements for you?
Well, I mean, there are a ton of different things. And I think this is really going to be a future in terms of how we relate to our doctor, that things are going to be sent over to our doctor and we're only going to go in when things come up. But that's futuristic. I would have a question for you, Kiran. So you're not a numbers person, but when you change somebody's diet, do you want to see what their blood sugar or A1C are doing?
If I'm working with a diabetic, sure. If they want to measure that, yeah, absolutely. But if I'm just working with somebody in general, no, I don't need to know what their A1C is or what their blood sugar levels are. I let how they feel, work. But if they are diabetic, then yeah, absolutely. And I have worked with diabetics in the past, and I have watched their A1C come down. And you're right, that is totally motivating to them.
Yeah. And I guess the thing I would say about that is that I think that we're looking at, for instance, on diabetes and blood sugar, and soon they're going to have blood sugar monitors where you don't have to prick yourself. It'll just be a cell phone app that'll read through your skin. I think they
That's right.
have that.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
But I think there's a tremendous amount of changes that go on in people, and here I'm talking people, but I'm starting to worry about dogs, and certainly we see this in cats, where levels that are nowhere near diabetic on blood sugar levels are still having injurious effects. One of them being on dementia. Dementia, the single biggest thing right now is felt to be what your blood sugar is, even if it's nowhere near that range. So in other words, when we're talking about wellness, and we're not talking about treating a sick diabetic, we're treating somebody that is 50 years old and we want to improve their diet so that they don't, and that's going to be different for different people. But it would be nice to say, I really want to see your fasting blood sugar at 85, not at 105. None of that would be diabetic, but it certainly would be significant as far as the dementia you have when you're 70. So I think that,
absolutely.
I think that numbers can help us. I agree with you that yes, we need to just go out and move more and get into nature and all that. What my history in veterinary medicine, or in medicine in general, has been is there's an awful lot of things that we have the impression worked, and they don't really, and that's why I'm concerned about things. If we're saying it's intuitive, I get this every day, and the bathroom scale is the most basic, measurement tool we have, right? Mm-hmm. Probably once a day I'll get somebody whose dog I think is overweight. They say we're working on it. We changed his diet. They come in 6 months later. They'll always say, "Oh, I think he's lost some weight." They'll step on the scale and they've gone up 3 pounds. Those kind of subjective judgments can be way misleading. Now, it's not really practical to get somebody's dog on the scale every day unless you have a little dog. But if I have somebody who is willing to bring their dog by the clinic, have it walk across the scale, see what it is, I think that's probably going to make a bigger difference.
Sure, and and I agree with you. I mean, doing your physical once a year, and getting a physical once a year and using that as a baseline marker, as long as you're quote unquote healthy. I mean, if you are on statins, then you need to be monitored more. If you are diabetic, then you need to be monitored more. But just in general, doing that once a year is great. But the problem with the regular type of conventional testing is most doctors don't test for vitamin D. They don't test for a magnesium deficiency, so if you're going to the doctors and just getting the regular tests, those are great, but again, who's deciding on those markers? I would rather them go to a functional lab and get functional testing done. Let's look at our organic acids, and let's even a homocysteine test. I'll have people go, if I want to check their vitamin B12 levels and their folic acid levels, the quickest way is a homocysteine test, but they go to the doctors and the doctors won't do it. Well, you don't have heart disease, there's no reason for it. So there is a reason to get testing, but I think what it is I just knowing how markers are always changing, it just concerns me that if we're not falling within a perfect range, then they're more subjective to a physician saying, well, then you need to take these medications. And so I always say, well, who says I have to take that medication? That's my only thing. We do need a baseline.
Sure, and I guess I would be talking not so much about blood testing, when that's obviously what I do all day is look at blood test numbers. I'm really talking about, because things on like a yearly physical, and recent studies say that a yearly physical has no positive impact on health. So we should even be questioning that. But the idea is that a year is way too long of a time. If you're having blood pressure problems and you do it and you're waiting till your next thing a year from now, damage is done already. So the idea would be, what can we do on a regular basis ourselves? I guess it's a bit of taking control to ourselves, right. And a lot of it is not what the normal numbers are. That's my point. It's what your own trend is, because none of these things that we have to measure these things with are that accurate. I mean, I've got a blood pressure monitor for dogs. I've got a blood pressure monitor for myself, but I realize those things are probably, if they're within 20 points, you're probably fortunate. But I can also tell if I've been inactive this week and my blood pressure goes up. For me, trending your own trends, I think, does tell you something. So that's why I'm really more interested in what can we look at on a daily basis to accomplish things that add to our goals of feeling better.
Right. And that's kind of what you just said too, is your own markers. And so if you're feeling really just out of whack and grumpy, it's really about taking a look and saying, okay, what am I doing differently, or what haven't I done? So you're absolutely right. I'm completely agreeing with you.
And I agree. And it's about being in touch with your own body and knowing how you feel. Like the other day, I knew I had not eaten in time. And I'm not diabetic, but my blood sugar could sometimes drop. So I knew that I was off schedule for me, and I needed to eat, and I needed to get my blood sugar back up. But it's about being in tune with your own body and knowing how you feel, knowing what you need, giving your body the good nutrients that it needs, and feeling good on a regular basis. And one more point I wanted to make, and then we'll go back to you, Dr. Harris. So another measurable marker, I think, that someone could do just on their own without having to go to the doctor, take a tape measure right at your belly button. And for a man, so don't cheat, it's not where your pants are hanging. That's not where I'm talking about. It's exactly straight around at your belly button. And for a man, it should be under 40 inches, and for a woman, under 34 inches. And so belly fat is a sign that we're maybe not so healthy, that we're heading towards diabetes or other heart issues, things like that. So that's something that you can measure yourself as well and decrease that belly fat. Dr. Harris, what were you going to say?
One point I would have is that yes, it's important to listen to your body, but your body lies to you also. And for instance, we know that on stress-induced diseases, like fibromyalgia and that kind of a thing, they do not correlate very well with self-reported stress in people. And I see this, especially in cats, that they get a lot of stress-related diseases. People don't say that their cat is upset. They say he's just sitting on the back of the couch looking perfectly happy. Now, if you were to check their cortisol levels, they're clearly stressed, and this is true in people. The stress hormones are up. You don't necessarily feel stressed. A different version of that is, and this is where measurement comes into play. We took care of my mother-in-law for some time who had emphysema, and so she was on oxygen. She would sometimes say, "I'm really nervous and stressed today. I'm just jittery," and there was nothing to be jittery about. She knew that and so forth. But if we measured her oxygen with a simple pulse oximeter, it would be down below about 85. And we'd turn up her oxygen level, and the jitters would go away. Now, she never said, I don't feel like I'm getting enough oxygen, I can't breathe. Her body was not telling her that. Her brain was saying emergency, emergency, emergency. Mm-hmm. But it was not connecting it with that. So having a pulse oximeter on hand was good. And my life was saved by my pulse oximeter after I had open heart surgery. I said I was having a hard time breathing. The nurse on the phone said, well, it's natural 10 days after surgery. And I put my oximeter on and it said 70%. They said, get in here. So numbers can be a good thing.
Well, when it comes to the hospital anyway, and people and the nurses aren't listening to you, I honestly would bring in every single gadget I could find. But that's a whole different story. But yeah, absolutely.
So what are our pointers that our viewers can take away from what we're talking about? Dr. Harris, let's wrap it up. Maybe give a couple of things that someone can easily do either on their own or with their doctor's help to be measuring their health and fitness. And we're going to finish up. We're just going to give those pointers and be done.
My number one thing, which would agree with Kiran, is that people just need to walk more, and their dogs need to walk more. We've talked about that before. That's the biggest single thing as far as preventing dementia and preventing high blood pressure and all those other things. They make Fitbits for dogs. Oh. They make GPSs for dogs. They started out with hunting dogs, where people wanted to know where their stupid Labrador had gotten off to. And it'll map out where they've been today. But if we have those kind of things for dogs, and there's a number of them you can get that measure their activity and so forth. And I'll tell you, on dogs don't get nearly the activity that their owners think they do. They've also shown that there's a positive correlation with the dog's weight is going to be better the more steps they take. So if I was going to choose one thing, I would choose something that's simply measurement. And if you want to wear that and then take your dog for a walk and you're both getting credit for it, that's great too.
Great. I didn't know about the Fitbits for dog, but that's interesting. And so I have Dr. Harris's book here, The Good Life for Dogs, which is very interesting because, as you could tell during our conversation, it really is basically a flow between people and dogs and animals of the same kind of things that apply for our human health, applying for our dog and animal health. Is that correct, Dr. Harris?
I would agree.
Yeah. So I would go with Dr. Harris and Kiran, get out there and walk more. If you're wanting to run, start running. Get that mile under 15 minutes, and that will show like your fitness level, that you actually are breathing, you're inhaling nicely, you're exhaling nicely, you're detoxing your body, or just walk to walk, or just go out with a friend and enjoy nature, however it gets you moving and get you out there. And then if you want to be adventurous, Kiran knows I'm big on plank. I haven't been doing it as aggressively as I was, but planking really gets you going. It's a really good full body workout, will really help tighten up your core, your abs, and then be measuring that belly fat. So I'm not big on the scale myself, Dr. Harris, and I only weigh myself, I don't know, every couple of weeks. I'm more about like, how do my clothes fit? And I especially have one test skirt that I've had since 1985 or something like that, and if I could get into it and I could get it buttoned and zipped, I know I'm good. If I can't get it all the way, then I know I need a little work. So whatever works for you to get you moving and out there into nature, and well, especially depends on your weather. We still have beautiful weather where I live. But anyway, get moving, be in tune with your body. And any final words, Kiran?
Just get out there and do what the dogs do. Take off the doggy booties, take off your shoes and socks, and just connect with Earth and realign and reground yourself.
That's great. Dr. Harris, thank you so much for joining us, and I will talk to you both again soon.